What is up, everyone? Welcome back to episode 2 of Be the Number. I am T Off Sports, and I'm thrilled to once again be joined by my co-host, Josephine Chang. Before we get started, I have to give a big thank you to everyone that tuned into the first show. We had an overwhelming amount of views and support, and I'm really glad to see everyone liked what they heard. If you aren't doing so already, you can give our podcast a follow on Instagram or Twitter at Be the Number Pod, and you can always listen to us weekly on iTunes at Golf WRX Radio, and we will hopefully be available for visuals soon at Golf WRX YouTube channel. Now that we have all of that out of the way, Josephine, how are you doing this week?
I'm doing well. I know that last week I said I was going to start to watch the PGA Tour a little bit more, but I got a little sidetracked. Ended up watching the U.S. Women's AM, which my teammate ended up winning, so shout out to Jensen Castle for playing some really solid golf. But I did watch the playoff for the WGC, which I'm really excited to say all three players were people that we talked about last week on our episode. So that was exciting. That was really cool to see. Congratulations to Abraham Ancer, obviously, but great playing by all three of them. But how are you doing? I mean, I feel like we had a pretty solid weekend watching some golf.
Yeah, I think it was a good tournament. As you said, I mean, congratulations to Abraham Ancer. It's been a long time coming for him. I feel like that's a win he should have gotten a long time ago. Even if we just look last year, like the way he played at the RBC Heritage when he lost that tournament to Webb Simpson, that was one of the best ball striking and GIR performances I've ever seen from a golfer. For him not to win that tournament was rather shocking. So, he probably got a little bit fortunate yesterday. Harris English fell apart on himself. Bryson DeChambeau did the same. Cameron Smith had a chance late, and Ancer stuck the approach on the second playoff hole and made the putt that Burns wasn't able to make from a little bit closer. So he deserves the victory from it. And, I kind of thought going into that playoff, Hideki was playing the best, and I thought Hideki might be the one that would win. But really good calls from everybody that you had mentioned. Like, those were three guys that I know were inside the top 12 of your model. And they were three guys that I liked also, but you were even a little bit higher on them than I was.
Yeah, I remember when I pulled out Hideki, you talk about him, you're a little iffy. And I said, no, I feel like he's got good momentum going with like putting himself in contention at the Olympics and then putting himself in contention again. I just think his game's trending in a good place.
Yeah, and you were higher on Hideki than I was for sure. Like Burns and Ancer, I think was more of a mutual between the two of us. Ancer, we talked about the GIR percentage, and that came to fruition with the way it played out. Hideki was a positive value for me. The problem that I ran into with Hideki is I was so bullish on Justin Thomas and Dustin Johnson and paying up for those two people that I just think that, when you're going up to the $9,900 range, that, a little bit above $10,000 for Dustin there, you just kind of start losing a little bit of the wiggle room to fit everybody in. So it wasn't so much that I didn't like Hideki. I just didn't find a way to fit him into a lot of lineups. And then the problem with Ancer that I ran into, I loved him for cash games. I mentioned on the show, he's one of my favorite cash game plays. And I didn't have a whole ton of him in GPP contests, unfortunately. And at the end of the day, that's okay. Like 80% give or take of my exposure weekly comes from cash game contests. So I think, if I'm going to be like Ancer, Berger, Louis, those were the three guys that I pretty much built every single lineup around from there. A lot of the GPP stuff became Rory and Paul Casey and Dustin and Thomas, and that didn't work out as well, but it was a pretty good week overall. Like the one person that ended up ruining the week for me was Corey Connors. I had a big bet on him against Ian Poulter. In retrospect, I think when you're looking at Ancer and Connors at about the same price tag, the ownership wasn't such vastly different amount. I think Ancer made a lot more sense. Like I'm always basing his Corey Connors win at the Valero Open. I got him at 250 to 1. Maybe I have a soft spot for him there, but it's not like he has shown tons of win equity in his past either. That's his one win. At least Ancer has some wins on other tours. So I think it was a mistake I made there, but it is what it is with it. And I think it was a good first tournament that we had, but let's move forward into the Wyndham Championship this week and discuss this event. So it's 7,127 yards, par 70, Bermuda greens, full field of 156 golfers with top 65 and ties making the cut. Jim Herman won this in 2020 at 21 under. JT posted in 2019 at 22 under. Brandt Snedeker in 2018 at 21 under. Henrik Stenson at 2017 at 22 under. And Siwoo Kim in 2016 at 21 under. That's obviously a strong trend that points to 21 or 22 under being the target total. But in your opinion, what makes this such an easy test for the players for why we get those totals?
You know what? I think that with this course, Bermuda from tee to green, I mean, so many courses are Bermuda grass. It's just something that the players are used to, something that they're not going to run into too much trouble with. On top of that, it's one of the shorter courses on the PGA Tour, and I think that they can just like take advantage of that. On top of that, so this course, it's a Donald Ross course, so just specifically like undulating greens, they're a little smaller, which tends to make it a little bit more difficult in terms of just approach game. But more specifically, a Donald Ross course, you need to play from the tee back. And so it almost makes course management a must-have in terms of that, you know, that where these pins are going to be, you kind of have a map of how you have to play a hole. Just because where that pin position is, you have to hit it off the tee to a specific place to have a good approach in. And that's just how Donald Ross course is set up. And so I think players coming in this, if they have good experience, if they've been here before, they kind of already have a good layout of how they're going to play.
Yeah, and I agree with exactly what you just said. Like, above all else, this is a less than driver setup that rewards fairways gained. Players hit a tour high 73.8% of greens here historically, but not every green hit measures equally. Like most Donald Ross design, the green complexes are tricky and feature some undulation, and the fast Bermuda surface tends to be the one defense of the property. So between all of that we just both said, how did you weigh your model, and what are some of the stats you looked at?
Right. So going into this, after doing a little research just on the course and the historics of how it plays, I definitely looked at just off the tee, accuracy off the tee, knowing that you have to play what I call target golf. You have to hit to a certain spot to give yourself and set yourself up for a good approach shot. And so I looked at just driving accuracy off the tee, and then I did weigh green regulations really high because hitting greens in regulation sets you up to make more birdies and if not pars. And again, I just tend to like looking at putting just with undulation in these greens. I know you don't really, so I did look at just 3-putt percentages as well as proximities for how close they hit it from 150, 175, just because the closer you are, the more likely you're going to make a putt. And with this being a shorter course, a lot of approaches, even more than last week, are from 150 to 175. And then I also looked at scrambling percentages. And so short game in general, I just wanted to make sure, because these greens are a little smaller, and even with a good approach shot, you might hit a bump in a green and it might just like shoot you off. And so those are kind of the stats that I really looked at. And yeah, other than that, those I also looked specifically at experience here on this course, just because, as I said, you need to know where the pins are and where to hit them. So I did weigh that a little bit more as well.
Yeah, I ramped up my course history a little bit more than I usually do. We see so many rollover effects of the same guys playing well here, and it's for the reason you just mentioned. You need to know where to miss with it. And as far as the putting goes, it's not that I know like we keep talking about the putting on this a lot. That's the better way that I like to measure putting, is kind of what you just said. And that's one of the ways I did it. So I have a lot of stats this week that I measured, and I won't go into as much detail as I did last week with it, but I do want to give a little bit of a rundown because I do think it's important. So I weighted proximity from 125 to 175 yards for 17.5%. 64% of irons come from this range. That pairs nicely with the 15% I placed on par for average between 400 to 450 yards. 8 holes land in this range, and it's why irons continually come from that same exact distance. I have 12.5% on overall birdie or better percentage and 15% on strokes gained total on easy courses. At the end of the day, this is a birdie fest, and finding golfers that excel on those tests is important. I have 17.5% on total driving. That is a weighted recalculation I used of 80% accuracy and 20% distance. So just as you said, I want to find guys that are going to locate fairways. I think that's the most important thing here. Data points to off the tee being 3.8% more impactful than an average tour stop. And I think that's because locating fairways gives players a real chance to control second shots. I have 12.5% on a combined category of strokes gained total on fast Bermuda greens and 3-putt avoidance. So that's what I'm talking about with putting. 12.5% is kind of a lot, but the strokes gained total on fast Bermuda greens doesn't incorporate putting into that. That's just a total overview of it. And then the 3-putt avoidance is into it. It's thrown into that amount there. It's a 50-50 split for me. As I mentioned last week, not something I love weighting. Just think this is a nice way to infuse some semblance of a flat stick. And then I wrapped it up with 5% on weighted par 5 and 5% on strokes gained total on Donald Ross designs. The par 5 is 85% par 5 birdie or better percentage and 15% proximity from 200 plus yards. And the Donald Ross weight isn't my favorite because I do think this course is a little bit different than a lot of the Donald Ross designs that we see. You always have certain quirks that are the same, and I think like that undulation of the greens, and that is one of them here. But it should just add a little bit more of the course fit to the equation that I'm trying to find. So that's how I weighed my model this week. I did notice that like a lot of the guys that have found success are the ones that pop to the top of my model. So I think that's a good sign for the way I built my model. But let's get into the tournament this week, and we have 6 players above $10,000. It's led by Hideki Matsuyama at $11,000. We have Louis Oosthuizen at $10,700, Webb Simpson at $10,600, Will Zalatoris at $10,300, Patrick Reed at $10,200, and Jason Kokrak at $10,000. When you look at that range, Josephine, anybody stick out to you that you like this week?
Obviously, I'm still going to root for Hideki. I just think he's got a lot of momentum going. Of course, he's also the most expensive player this week. I also noticed, obviously, Webb Simpson with his history here at this course. I mean, he's plays in the top 5 the last 4 years, I think.
Yeah, top 3 the last 4 years.
Yeah, there it is.
2011.
Yeah, so I know that he's going to be a really popular player coming in. I mean, already he's got a pretty high ownership percentage. I mean, I like Louis Oosthuizen here too. I mean, they're the top 3 most expensive players, and my models rank them really high. So, I mean, stats-wise, they're all solid, and I mean, they're up there for a reason.
Of that group, who's the highest for you?
I have Hideki being the highest.
Yeah, I mean, I have Hideki second. I guess my biggest issue with this top of the leaderboard is Webb Simpson at $10,600. This price tag is just opening up a can of worms. Like, they knew this overall level of popularity was going to happen when they placed him here. Last year, he was nearly 30% at $11,200. So it just creates a headache on what to do with him, since fading him at this event has been detrimental to success in the past. As we just mentioned, 4 straight years inside the top 3, 30% last year. That's with Brooks Koepka in the field. Didn't matter. He's still producing with it. So that's something that's I wish they would have just made him $12,000 and made people make a decision with it. Like, you're going to hear this throughout the industry the whole week. Webb has a house on the property. He named one of his daughters Wyndham. Like, this is a tournament near and dear to his heart. Unfortunately, I can't find too many red flags myself. He's first in all iterations of my model, and the 8 under that he posted at the WGC on Sunday only helps the ownership. I assume this is going to end at over, I mean, right now we're looking at about 20%. Unfortunately, I think this is going to even be higher than that when the steam catches on. But I don't really have a reason not to play Webb. Like, I tried to fade him here last year, and it bit me, unfortunately. So it's like, I don't know if I want to play that game. Great cash game play, probably the best cash game play that you can find on the board. Hideki's number 2 for me. It's not often we see him at the top of the board, but if we remove Webb from the equation, I do believe the overall price tag makes sense. It's a tournament he's found success at in the past. Also, probably my favorite play in a GPP was Patrick Reed at $10,200. And just with the pricing going to the projected ownership going to Oosthuizen and Simpson and Hideki, somebody has to come in underweight here. And Reed is the guy who's the odd man out in this field. His weighted proximity that I measured isn't ideal, but we have seen him find past success at Sedgefield, and he does like a birdie fest. So from like a large field GPP perspective, I do really like Patrick Reed. I mean, that leaves us with 3 players from there. I know you brought up Louis a little bit. I do think he makes sense from a cash game. I guess the only negative I would say about Louis is we did see some regression from him last week. I mean, I don't want to count one round as being the problem, but I almost would just rather play Webb Simpson at that point. The ownership isn't that much different. The price tag is about the same. I just think Webb's a better play. But that leaves us with Jason Kokrak and Will Zalatoris. Do you have thoughts on either one of those two?
Yeah, so actually, I I don't remember if I brought up Will Zalatoris last episode, but he actually ranked pretty high last week for me, and he ended up playing well at the WGC. So he ranks kind of in the middle off of my model here, and I kind of said maybe just because he has good form coming in, just like playing well last weekend, but I feel like he's still pretty risky. Like I feel like he could, go either way. He hasn't been the most solid player lately. And then I didn't really have anything for Jason Kokrak. Like nothing really stood out to me about him.
Yeah, Kokrak for me, I think he's a good cash game play. We see 3 top 15s at this venue in the last 4 years. His putter's been leading him a little bit this season, but 3 straight top 34 finishes. I think he's relatively safe. I guess my one problem with Will Zalatoris is you kind of remove the one thing, and he's a great iron player. I think he's second in my model when it comes from approach play. The problem is he's really good with his distance off the tee. And I think if you remove that from the equation, like, look, he could burn me. He could club down. He could be having, it's a wedge fest for the most part. And if his wedges get hot, sure, he can find success here. But I just think the 3-putt avoidance and some of those things are ways I was trying to kind of look to avoid him based off of that. He was the only one in the section that failed to grade inside the top 10 for me. And for that reason, I'm probably not going to have much exposure. I can make an argument, as I said, for Kokrak and Louis and Cash. I think Hideki is a good GPP play. I think Webb is the elephant in the room here of what we're going to have to figure out what to do with him because he is the top price person, the top ownership person for a reason. I wish he would have been the top price person. And then Reed is just a good contrarian dart throw that I'm looking at. I don't know if you have anything else to say about that group.
Nope, I think we hit everything. And yeah, I also just with Will, he hasn't had much experience at this course, so I was really iffy on him from the get-go.
Well, let's move over to the $9,000 range then, and it's led by Brian Harman at $9,900. We have Tommy Fleetwood at $9,700, Sung Jae Im at $9,600, Russell Henley at $9,400, your boy Matthew Wolff at $9,300, which that was a really good call on your part last week. He competed early on in that tournament. I know he only came in a share of 17th place, but for the price tag you got him for, that was a great call you had there. Adam Scott at $9,200, Siwoo Kim at $9,100, and Bubba Watson at $9,000. So for me, there's a couple players. This isn't the range I'm going to be finding myself with the most exposure to. I do think the safest play is probably Harman at $9,900. He makes some sense across the board because of his 10% ownership total. Harman knows how to make birdies in bunches and will receive a big boost with driver not being needed off the tee. For me, the most upside is probably Sung Jae Im at $9,600. And Sung Jae is a guy that on all the shows I do, I keep recommending Sung Jae every single week, and it hasn't worked yet. But if I've learned anything about him in the past, it's that form isn't necessarily a requirement when you throw him onto a Bermuda surface. He's gained with his irons in his last 5 events. That's a big increase for him. He ranks 3rd on fast Bermuda greens, 8th on Donald Ross designs, and is 1st in total driving. So I will have GPP exposure to him. And I will be taking a page out of your book with Matthew Wolff at $9,300. If he's only going to be, roughly 5% owned, I think it provides great leverage opportunity in an event like this, especially for those playing a large field contest. He ranks 11th in the weighted proximity range of 125 to 175 yards in my model and is inside the top 10 in birdies and scoring on easy courses. For me, I guess the one person that I will be underweight to will be Bubba Watson at $9,000. My biggest concern is you remove the driver from the equation for him. That's a negative. He's a decent lag putter at his best, but, the 3-putt avoidance numbers do not look good. So I guess the other person I will throw into this, because I do expect on your model and on most models, Russell Henley's going to pop on most models because of the approach game that he brings in. I think it makes sense in GPP contests. He's going to be very popular. The other one would be Adam Scott at $9,200. That's more of a GPP play of under 5% owned. Continues to be great with the putter and the ball striking returns. I think he can win. But what are some of the players you liked in this range? Yeah,
actually, you hit on all the people that I really liked here as well. So Sungjae Im obviously playing well the last 2 years, a 9th place finish and a 6th place finish. So he seems to have good experience and good results on a Donald Ross course, on a Bermuda course. And I mean, his stats, he's solid in terms of his approaches. He's solid off the tee. So I really liked him here. As you said, Russell Henley as well, just everything you said about his approach game, but also his scrambling percentage at 64% and overall bogey avoidance of 13. I mean, looking at that, knowing that even if he just barely misses a green, he's solid there. I also actually was looking at Siwoo Kim just because of his experience here, and he seems to be doing okay this season. Surprisingly enough, I was confused and a little sad that my model didn't really like Matthew Wolff this week. Not really sure why. I was a little sad about that, but I mean, just watching him play last weekend, I mean, he looked good that first day, kind of faltered a little bit, but I think that just goes to show like his game is starting to trend in a good position. So, yeah, everyone you touched on. I guess my question was, my model did not really like Adam Scott, and I couldn't quite figure that one out. And I don't know.
It's probably, I mean, if I had to guess why it didn't like him, it would probably be the proximity ranges. He's 109th for me from 150 to 175 yards. He's only 84th overall from that weighted proximity range that I had. The total driving's a bit of a problem too, 127th in accuracy. I don't want to look at that too much because these guys are professional golfers. He can club down. This isn't like he's going to be bombing driver off the tee. Like, he can club down. He will be fine in that. I don't think that that's a problem. He's been being led by the putter, and it's one of the things, like, he's second for me on strokes gained total on fast Bermuda plus 3-putt percentage. 21st for me in overall birdie or better, 17th on the par 5s that I looked at, 35th on the par 4 average. I just think that if you're going to give me a version of Adam Scott that is going to be under 5% owned, and he's 22nd for me in my model. I mean, that's not like there's some great value on the surface of what it is. He's technically a negative value based off of that. But when I look at where my model ranks him compared to the consensus rank, I have a 31 spot difference. And those are kind of sometimes spots where I'm willing to throw a small little like leverage play on Adam Scott just because it doesn't take very much to get overweight to the field. So that was my reason. And I'm curious, where is Matthew Wolff on your model?
He is barely in the top 60 for me.
Wow. Yeah, he's sixth overall for me. He's 10th from GPP, 7th for cash games. And he is one of the guys when I am looking for like leverage in a tournament type setting, especially one of those large fields. He's one of the ones that sticks out for me the most. And I guess the reason for that is probably just the birdie or better percentage he brings to the table, how he plays easy courses. And, if we look at it on the surface of how he is off the tee, yeah, he's very inaccurate. I think he can club down and be fine. So I'm willing to give some of those guys a look. Like, obviously I weighted at 80% in my total driving. So it is in there. Like, Wolff is being taken down to some extent because of that, but there's just so many things that are bringing him up. Like, he's in the top 10 in most of the other things that I weighted. So I do like him. If you were to give a player, who would be your biggest fade in this range?
Oh, man. I mean, I think looking now at my model, just the way that I weighted it, I think just because I am still learning as I go, so I think I might have weighted it a little bit harshly in terms of just overall driving accuracy and overall like green in regulation. I think that's what's hurting Matthew Wolff here. But overall, my model didn't like him. I still like him, so I probably still would go with Matthew Wolff here.
Yeah, for me, my biggest fade would probably be Bubba, as I mentioned. Fleetwood didn't grade all that well, but at 3% on Bermuda greens, I'm kind of okay with somebody wanting to get cute there and try to play him. Other than that, I think there's some playability across the board on other people. I just think Bubba, this is a tough setup for him. But let's move over into the $8,000 range. And so we have 11 players in this section. To me, 4 are more intriguing than the rest. But I would love to hear your viewpoint before I give mine.
Yeah, so in this range, the first person I looked at was actually Kevin Na. So I didn't mention him last week. I liked him last week as well. And he's also actually, we went to the same high school, obviously not during the same time. So I've always been following him for a good amount. But I liked him here simply because he has good finishes on this course. He's playing some solid golf coming in, playing well last weekend. And then just short game wise, he's really solid in scrambling, driving accuracy really solid as well. But one thing I really liked is that the approach distances here on this course are very similar to TPC Southwind, where they played last weekend. And I just like how he looks on that course. So I'm hoping that'll translate over. So I really liked him here in this range. Another person that I really liked here is your buddy, Seamus Power. I just thought that he played decent last year with the 27th place finish. He's got good form coming in, and then obviously just a win at the Barbasol. And so I personally know Champions. We played there a lot here at Kentucky for qualifying and things like that. And so I know that course, in a sense, sets up a little bit similar just to how Sedgefield will, in the sense that off the tee, you don't necessarily need a driver. You need to be accurate and set yourself up for a good approach into the green. And so knowing that he fared well, obviously, at the Barbasol, I mean, I feel pretty good about him here this week as well. And then another person I liked here was Kevin Streelman. And so his proximities from 150, 175 were really good. Green and regulations just under 69%. The only thing I had with him is just he's a little risky how he's been playing so far this season. I mean, and then at this course, he's also missed the cut in 2019. And then I don't think he played last year. And so he ranked high in my model just because of his stats. But I was wondering if you had anything to say about him.
Yeah, Streelman for me, if I'm going to look for GPP contests, he was one of the guys, like, he's not in that core four of the people that I'm most targeting, but he was the one in a GPP that I am willing to consider. He's 16th in that key par 4 range. He's 27th in overall birdie or better percentage. I always kind of like him at these shorter tests where it's not so daunting off the tee and he's able to hit fairways and do that. So I think he makes a lot of sense. 13% ownership is kind of lofty, but I don't have a problem with him in a GPP. I don't like him in cash games. I'd rather avoid him there. I just think there's too much volatility for what he brings to the table, but I do like him for GPPs. And then fun fact about Kevin Gnaw, we've talked about this a little bit when we talked the first time, but you're from the Diamond Bar area, which is the high school that you went to with where Kevin Gnaw went. And I know that area very, very well. And I used to go down there all the time. And on the golf course that's up there, Kevin Gnaw was always down there playing. So I'd always see him there. And now he's in the Vegas area, in the Southern Highlands region. So I think Gnaw and I are just moving at the same places together at this point with it. But I really, really like Kevin Gnaw. He's probably one of my favorite plays in this event. He's 7th overall in my statistical model. He also ranks 7th in scoring on easy courses, 30th in weighted proximity, and is the #1 player around the green. You know, I don't think that around the green is the stat I want to be weighing so much of, because if you're missing the greens, you're not scoring. But there is undulation to these. You're going to have to be able to save par. So I think that that's a stat, you know, maybe just worth looking at, even if you don't weigh it. The other 3 players for me that I did, or I am going to play, I think Ricky Fowler at 8,600. He's going to need a good finish here to qualify for the playoff event. I don't necessarily view that as a positive because of the pressure that brings, but he's another player that should be able to use his short game to find success. Kevin Kisner at 8,400. He kind of fits that same exact mold, although he stuck off the page in certain areas for me. 2 top 10s here in his last 3 tries. Current form is leaving something to be desired, but the ownership makes him an intriguing leverage spot in GPPs. And then Justin Rose made the list because of what he brings to the table statistically. 1st on Donald Ross courses, 4th on easy courses, 2nd on fast Bermuda greens, 3% ownership on a golfer that can win. I mean, he was the #1 player in the world a couple years ago. So if I'm looking to just throw a random dart, I do think you could do a lot worse than Justin Rose at 3%. That's, for me, kind of where my exposure is going to be. As much as I'd love to come on here and talk about Seamus Power, which I seem to do every single week, 34th overall for me in my model. I think a lot of that is because the distance he adds off the tee doesn't necessarily come into play. A lot of his around the green stuff does, and he hasn't been great on Donald Ross designs. Maybe he keeps the momentum going, but that's something we're going to have to look at. Sebastian Munoz, always in GPPs, makes some sense to at least look at. My model did not like him, though. Charles Schwartzel looked like a better cash game play than a GPP play for me, and that's about it. I mean, I guess I would be remiss if I didn't bring up Robert McIntyre just because he is the most expensive player in this range. 92nd for me overall. My model did not like anything about him. In fairness, very limited data we have on him just because he has primarily played on the European Tour, playing a little bit more on the PGA Tour here recently, but it's kind of tough to know what to expect from him. He's a big left-hander who I think kind of removes some of his qualities that he has. So for me, it's going to be Gnaw, Fowler, Kisner, Rose, and probably a little bit of Streelman at the end of the day to sneak him in here and there. But those are the only 5 I have. I'm curious to hear, who is the lowest price person you have in this range?
It would be Robert McIntyre.
Yeah, I mean, I just think McIntyre, like the thing is he's, 4.5% owned, but when I'm trying to find something positive about him statistically, he's kind of just negative across the board. And I don't want to use that as the sole reasoning because the results look really good. Like a 15th and an 8th in 2 of his last 3 starts. And I think a lot of that might stem from the ability that he is able to rip it off the tee. He has a lot of distance to him, and maybe he finds a way to make this course work. But he was my least preferred play of the group. But let's move on into the $7,000 section. And let's run this from the $7,900 range to the $7,500 range just to condense this a little bit. The first person I wanted to ask you about before we even get into this range, where do you have Hank Levy Oda this week?
He actually ranks really high. He's in my top 20 of my model here. And frankly, I just thought that he has like great form this season. I mean, he has that withdrawal from the 3M Open, but that was due to family issues. I mean, he was looking really good and people were confused. And I mean, I just think he's got a great short game and great approach game. And I just feel like he'd be really solid here this week.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. And then I ran my model and he's 71st overall for me. And I'm trying to figure out what makes him so bad. Like, as you said, that withdrawal that he was doing very well in that tournament. So that's like, can't count that against him. He has an 8th, 4th, and 5th in the 3 prior starts to that. But, for safety, he jumps into being a better play. But it just did not like him from an upside perspective. Didn't like him on fast Bermuda greens. Didn't love what he brought to the table. And the thing is, he's 146 between 400 to 450 yard par 4s. Here's the problem with that. That's such a small sample size. I very much dislike weighing things like that. And I did because I do think it's relevant for a tournament like this. But it does worry me a little bit to be putting 15% on a category that is a little bit hit and miss with it. I think it's fine, but that's something that's more of a red flag on my end than anything. 37th in weighted par 5 birdie or better, 37th in overall birdie or better. And then just because of the way he putts on fast greens, 142nd for me overall. I mean, that's kind of one of the things that brought him down. But, if we bypass him, who are some of the guys you like in this $7,900 to $7,500 section?
Who else did I have up here? So I actually struggled in this section trying to look through some people. My model really liked 7,500. Really liked Patton Kizzire as well as Lucas Glover, but I didn't really like Glover just because of his record at the course. I mean, he doesn't seem to do too well here year after year. And then did your model like Patton at all?
Yeah, it did. Not overly, but he's a positive value in my overall rank. He's 26th overall. He's the 32nd highest priced guy. The thing with Patton is, and I think the biggest concern with him is he's very hit and miss. But like when we get these certain guys that are these Southeast type golfers, like the Brian Harmons, the Kevin Kisners, the guys that are used to these Bermuda surfaces, I think a guy like Patton can find success here because he's good at birdie tests. He's good on Bermuda. So I do think he can find success here. At 12% ownership, he was a negative value as far as my rank versus consensus. But with that being said, that's one of the things I'm willing to overlook just because he is such a streaky birdie maker that I think he can find success at a tournament like this. And we're going to need upside. And at $7,600, Patton Kizzire definitely gives you that upside that you're looking for.
Gotcha. Okay. I also wanted to ask you, how did your model like Ryan Moore?
So Ryan Moore is a UNLV guy. So I always like Ryan Moore. Obviously, the current form isn't what you would want to see with back-to-back missed cuts in his last two events. Missed the cut here in 2020, but a 6th and a 24th the 2 years before that. The one thing I love about Ryan Moore, and I always like about him in these events where finding fairways is important, he's one of the better players on tour in doing that, and it opens up the playbook for him a little bit. 4th in driving accuracy. He's 7th in my model in total driving, 19th in that weighted proximity range from 125 to 175 yards. So he is one of the guys that I will be targeting in this range. A little bit more from the GPP perspective for him. Like a guy like Zach Johnson, I think is a little bit more playable across the board. And I would be fine playing him in both things. I think Moore is more of a GPP guy. I'll avoid him for cash, but I will be taking shots in tournaments for sure.
Okay. Yeah. My model liked him a lot, just stats wise. And I just said, I wrote down in my notes, I was like, I'm weary of his recent performance. And so I thought I would just ask you to see what you had to say.
Yeah. And I run things a little bit more long-term than most people. Like I know I said that last week, but take that for what it's worth with it. Like my model has him 25th, 17th from an upside perspective. I just do think that at 7% ownership, there is a way to leverage ownership. And anytime I can find a way to leverage ownership on somebody that is a good course fit and has shown history here in the past, I will be fitting him into lineups at the end of the day.
Absolutely. That totally makes sense. I had no idea he was a UNLV alum.
We have a lot of UNLV alums. Like we have him, we have Charlie Hoffman, Garrick Higo, who's come on, is from there. A lot of other guys I'm missing too, but we kind of have a good team that I don't think people realize. And one of the interesting things is Tiger Woods was deciding between Stanford and UNLV when he made his decision. So, you know, it's a really prestigious golf school. Add Adam Scott to the mix too. He's another UNLV guy.
Yeah, I had no idea. I mean, I simply wanted to ask you just because like his stats and then his recent performance. And so when you threw that out, I was like, oh, perfect.
Yeah, I always like Moore. I mean, the recent performance makes me a little bit leery. And I mean, I think to me in this range, I kind of agree with you. I don't have a ton of players that I'm pinpointing either. Brandt Snedeker at 7,900 will be one of them that I am looking at. These wedge and putting contests are always right up Snedeker's alley. Good current form with 3 top 38 finishes over the last 4 weeks and has 2 top 3s here since 2016, including a win in 2018. I'm going to give another look to Mito Pereira at 7,900. He's just been really good since he started playing on tour the last couple weeks. Lucas Glover, I have marked down as a GPP only play at 7,700. I will do a little bit more diving into that. If that number increases from where he's currently at, I will be out, but I do think that there's a way to leverage there. And then I guess just Zach Johnson and Ryan Moore really at 7,500 is how I'm wrapping it up. Like the one thing I've noticed about this week, which I do like, is a lot of these regions, the ownership is going in certain directions. And a lot of where I want my exposure to be is in different places. So I think it's an easier build this week than some of these weeks like the WGC last week where everybody looks like a good play up top. And that's what you don't want. Like I want to have these decisions where it's like, okay, I don't like Bubba, but I really like this person. I don't like this person, but I really like this person. And it just gives me a chance to just be a little bit more bullish on certain players than others. But if we move down below that from $7,400 to $7,000, a couple guys for me that stuck out. Doug Gim at 7,300, great iron player, somebody that I always am looking at in these iron and wedge fests. Joel Dahman, same thing, 7,200. Chris Kirk at 7,200. Mark Hubbard at 7,000 and Ryan Moore at 7,000. Those were the 5 guys there that I like the most. What are your thoughts about any of those?
Yes. So I actually had almost the same exact people that you just said. Doug Gim, he was one of the first ones I looked at. I also had Chris Kirk on here, Joel Dahman. I mean, really the same people, and all for the same reasons. I mean, they're solid when it comes to their stats on this course, and One person I did want to ask you about, though, actually was, I hope I pronounced his name right. Ches Reavy?
Yes.
Is that how you pronounce his name? Okay. My model really liked him, and I was just wondering if your model liked him, if you had anything to say about him.
So 37th overall for me, 36 for upside. That puts him in the betting market at 90-1. I have him 6 spots of value. 1 spot of value on DraftKings. Last 4 years here, nothing better than a 37th. Current form looks very good with a 25th, 18th, 11th, 43rd, 59th miscut. Not the exact order of how that's gone down, but the last couple recent results from him. I mean, sure, the approach play for him, 7th overall for me over a 2-year sample size. Numbers are trending in the right direction over the last 24 rounds he's played. I guess the one thing that's brought him down a little bit is just how he's played on easy courses and at Donald Ross designs. The Donald Ross thing I'm willing to excuse more than the easy course ones. Pretty good at the par 4 average, 31st for me overall there. And I guess the other thing that kind of brought him down is just his par 5 scoring. But the thing is with that, you only have 2 of them. I don't want to affect every single guy on some of these stats that really when we look down in this range, and I mentioned this last week when we were talking about Wolf and Burns and these guys, when you get down in the section, you're really just trying to pinpoint certain qualities of a golfer you like. And you obviously want them to be a positive value at the end of the day in the way that you build your model. And Reavy is a positive value in the way I built my model. So I don't mind it on that front. And there's enough to like with the way that his stats build out. 18th on the strokes gained total, fast Bermuda, 3-putt avoidance. 5th in driving accuracy. Those are really the things you're trying to find. So we can figure out a blueprint here. He's good finding fairways. If he can get hot with a putter and he's, good with his proximity ranges, which I have him on weighted proximity 6th overall. So really he's just being taken down by some of those stats that I don't care as much about. So I definitely don't have a problem with Reavy at his price tag.
Okay, yeah, my model really liked him, and I just noticed that his ownership was pretty high, and I just wanted to see if you had anything to say about him. But also in this field range, so obviously at that 7,000 range, my model really liked, all 4 of these right back to my model really liked Aaron Wise, Doc Redman, Kyle Stanley, and Mark Hubbard. And I was just having trouble trying to distinguish who looked good here. I can't remember who you had just mentioned when you ran through it, but did you have anything about these 4?
I really like Hubbard. I think Hubbard makes a lot of sense. He's another guy. I know I keep mentioning that exact same thing, but guys like Kirk and Hubbard and these guys, Reavy, when you get these tests that when you're just looking to find fairways, they become such a different player than every other tournament that they play in. And we see it with Hubbard, 15th in 2020, 24th in 2017 when he played this. Aaron Wise is an interesting one for me that I don't know what to think about him. So when I looked at him from a GPP perspective from these tournament plays, much better play than when I looked at him for safety. And I guess that makes sense. Miscut in his last start, 69th at the John Deere, 66th at the Travelers. The one thing with Wise is he can get hot in bunches, I guess, and make birdies in bunches. That's at least something worth considering. It's just his putter is so bad. He might be the worst putter in this field. And I know we're kind of role reversing here with I'm now mentioning putting and I never do that. But I took him a couple weeks ago and he was missing every 2.5 footer. And I was like, I just can't do this again. So in a GPP, sure, if you want to take a chance, I guess I'd have him far away in cash games. And who were the other 2 guys that you said?
Doc Redman and Kyle Stanley.
Yeah, Redman, kind of the same thing for me. Better GPP play than cash play. And Stanley's been, I guess, trending in the wrong direction here recently. Fine course history. You kind of get a mixed bag with 2 missed cuts and a 13th and a 14th over his last 4 tries. But if I'm looking at a value perspective, Hubbard's a value for me. Ryan Armour's a value for me. Kyle Stanley's a value. Redman's a very small value. And then Wise would be a negative value. So probably not as high as you are necessarily on Wise, but I somewhat understand it. Just a couple of weeks ago, he was $9,000 something in one of those fields. And now he's 7,000 in a field that's really not that much worse than it was before.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I think I definitely have some tweaking to do with my model, just, as we go through it. But I'm curious just to see like what you have to say about these guys.
Yeah. One of the things though is we're talking about my model specifically right now. Like I always share it with Josephine and she makes a copy of it and puts in all her own weights. And that's one of the things that I always stress to everybody. Like if you follow me on Twitter at Toff Sports, I provide it weekly for everybody. You can make a copy of my model. You can go and change the weights however you want, because at the end of the day, yes, I'm putting a lot of research into this and I'd like to think that a lot of what I'm saying is right, but I want people to make their own decisions and I want people to be able to figure out how to make their own decisions. And I love being able to provide a tool that lets everybody do that. So, definitely follow me on Twitter and you can do what Josephine's doing with it, make your own model with it. And it's just a fun way to play around and kind of figure out who you're higher on than the rest of the industry. But let's wrap this up in the $6,000 section here. Let's just go from the top to bottom because there's not that many players, obviously, when you get down in this range. Like I do have a handful to talk about, but a lot of these guys are bottom feeders at the end of the day that are kind of unplayable. So anybody stick out to you?
So I had a tough time in this section as well, kind of for the reasons you just said. But I noticed that my model seemed to like Brian Stewart and Scott Stallings. And for Brian Stewart, my model really liked him. I just thought he was really risky. And simply because he missed the cut at the Barracuda last week, which is a course that I've played, which kind of sets up similar to this course this week in the sense of, again, it's kind of target golf. So I was like, I don't really know about that. But then for Scott Stallings, I just thought that his approach game seemed to be in a really solid place right now. He's played Sedgefield a good amount of times. And I mean, he didn't finish very well any of those times, but my take on this course is that experience adds up. And so I think like with how good they are, it just comes down to course management. And I figure he's got to figure that out, hopefully, eventually. Another player that I liked was Jason Dufner. I thought he's just statistically solid, and he's been playing some pretty good golf since the John Deere. But I also might be a little biased because whenever I did watch golf with my parents, it was like my mom's favorite player. So every time he came on, she just pick, oh my gosh, it's Dufner. And so I think that just puts him in a good place in my mind. But again, he's played the course a lot. He's not the greatest of finishes, but again, experience on this course I think is really valuable. So those are some of the players that I had from the get-go. What about you?
As far as Stallings goes, he's trending in the right direction with 4 straight made cuts and 18th last week, a 25th at the Rocket Mortgage. That's a Donald Ross. So I think that you at least can pinpoint that for him. He's a guy I always like too. And at 4% ownership, I definitely don't mind adding him to lineups. As you mentioned with Brian Stewart at 6,900, he's going to be popular, but ranks 8th in total driving, as well as 13th on those critical par 4s. Jim Herman at 6,900. Herman's the defending champion here. He became a little trendy last week before faltering on the weekend, but Sedgefield just seems to be a better fit for his game. Bryce Garnett at 6,800. 3 top 20s here since 2016. Back-to-back top 34 finishes on tour. A guy like Francesco Molinari at 6,800. He's kind of just a wild card for what I'm looking for. It's kind of like that Justin Rose thing, although Rose does grade much better and actually grades as a value. Molinari's more of the actual wild card in this mix. I'd only play him in GPPs, but he's a good driver, always been a good total driver. Maybe he finds something. He's a major winner. In a $6,800 range, it's really hard to find a guy that actually has pedigree like that to him. Henrik Norlander at 6,600, another guy that's going to be GPP only for me, but he's made 5 straight cuts, including a 5th at the Barbasol. And then to wrap it up, I guess it would be Martin Laird at 6,600. He's going to have little to no ownership and will be volatile. Denny McCarthy, 6,400. Form has been awful, but has a good course history here with a 9th, 22nd, 36 in his last 3 tries. And if you're just really trying to find maybe cash game plays cheap down here because you've gone up top, you have Webb, you have all those guys near the top, and you're trying to find some guys lower down here, I think Roger Sloan at 6,700 makes sense. I think Cameron Percy at 6,300 makes sense. I think those are guys that at least can make you a cut, which is what we're looking for from a cash game build. But yeah, once you get lower than And McCarthy is as volatile as it can come at 6,400. But as once you get lower than that, it's going to be difficult to find many people. Like pretty much everybody is on the bottom for me at that point. So as much as I'd love to say, let's just put Webb and Hideki in a lineup and go right to the bottom, like it's a little bit harder than that. And you're going to have to pick and choose in the $6,000 range to really find value. And it's just going to come down to what kind of build that you're making with your lineups. Like there's just certain players that'll work better with other players.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with some of the people that you just mentioned with Henrik Norlander. I was curious though. I mean, going down all the way to the bottom, I noticed that Michael Gellerman has a 4.3% projected ownership. And I was just confused because everyone else down here is like not even close to 1%. And all of a sudden he just popped out. And I was wondering if you had anything to say about him.
I loved Gellerman at the 3M Open. He was one of my plays I recommended as a top 40 play that I had. And I was recommending like full exposure in GPP contests with him. So here's the problem with Gellerman. The form looks fine. You have, what is that? That's 4 made cuts in his last 6 tournaments, I believe. The one problem is, like Aaron Wise, the putter just gets so bad at times. I mean, like, unfortunately, if you're not making putts, you're going to have problems. And maybe the putter is neutral. Maybe the putter shows up. I'm sure there's worse players that you could go to in the $6,000 range, but I worry a little bit that for the reasons why he was good in his start that I took him, that's because putting was neutralized. Putting does come a little bit more into play here. I think 3-putt avoidance could burn him. And that's one of the reasons why I ultimately did not end up having him for anything.
Okay, yeah, I was just curious because, I mean, he popped up at a 4.3% ownership all the way at the bottom. And I was like, I'm going to go check him out. And I mean, I really like that his green and regulations are, 70%. I mean, that's really, really good. So, but just to hear about the putting, that makes more sense on a course like this. It's 3 putts are gonna come.
Gellerman's,
show up.
Yeah, I mean, Gellerman's great when it comes to hitting greens in regulation. Like, he's third in my model over a 2-year sample size. He's great from the proximity ranges that we're looking for. Like, those are things that you want, but then, like, there's just so many red flags across the board. 113th in 3-putt percentage. He's 129th in scrambling. He's 122nd in overall birdie or better percentage. That's just because he's not making putts ever. He's not great from that par 4 range. He hasn't been great on easy courses, which I guess you would think that maybe he could be a little bit better just if it gets neutralized, but, it's not being neutralized here. So I'm out for that reason, I guess, more than anything.
Okay, that makes sense. It's just a curiosity. I wasn't really sure, but as for this range, I don't really have anyone else unless you've got anything.
No, I think that's probably it for me too. I mean, before we get out of here, I would love for you to tell everybody some of your experience of playing Donald Ross designs. I know you mentioned a little bit at the beginning, but anything that maybe you think people should be looking for that we haven't mentioned?
That we haven't mentioned. I mean, I think just what I said at the beginning, it's going to come down to course management. And I think a lot of that comes from just experience of playing this course. And so, like, off the tee, you have to set yourself up depending on where that pin is that day. And so, I mean, I just think we need to look for smart golfers this time around. It's not a course that you can just bomb it off the tee and hope for the best. Like, you can't just hit it, go find it, and hit it again and expect to play well. So really, overall, just smart golfers this weekend.
Yeah, and I'll double down on that. I think you're just looking for guys that are going to find fairways, guys that know where to miss to the correct part of the green. I think that's one of the things with the Donald Ross designs is if you miss it to the wrong spot, you could be on the wrong side of the slope. All of a sudden you start 3-putting. So that's kind of what I was saying. Not all greens in regulation at this course are built equally. You still need to miss to the correct side. That's going to come down to being a smart golfer and being able to find your way through this. But I think that's it for this week. Josephine, let everybody know where they can find you.
Yeah, absolutely. So my handle for basically all my social media is the same. It's jchang1020. You can find me on Twitter. You can find me on Instagram. And you can find us together, me and Spencer, on Twitter and Instagram as well at BeTheNumberPod. we're slowly getting those up and running. I think we're trying to hopefully get onto Golf WRX's YouTube page. Is that correct? Eventually?
I would love to be up this weekend. I mean, I'm hoping that everybody, or there's somebody out there watching this with video right now. At the very least, we're going to have it up and running soon. And as we kind of alluded to last weekend, we're going to be planning to have interviews. So we definitely want to make sure we have videos for when we bring on some PGA Tour players and talk to them about their careers. So hopefully we're up this week. If not, it's going to be in the very near future. But you can find me on Twitter at TOffSports. Thanks again for everybody who has tuned into the first episode and left reviews. Please follow us at @BeTheNumberPod. As Josephine mentioned, we're trying to build up those numbers. If you have any questions about this tournament, feel free to reach out to either one of us. Reach out to us on Twitter or Instagram. We're more than pleased to answer any single question. But thank you once again for tuning in. Good luck this week, and let's try to make some money.